And greetings, friends, and welcome to part 3 of this video series on the Passover. Of course, on this video series, we're dealing with some of the arguments that people make to try and justify them not keeping the Passover. And one of the arguments I want to deal with in this video broadcast is found in John 2:13, John 5:1, John 6:4, and John 11:55. People use this scripture to justify them not keeping the Passover. And this scripture says this. It says in John 2:13, "And the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem." John 5:1, it says, "After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem." In John 6:4, it says, "And the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh." And people say, these festivals are for the Jews, not for the Christian. We Christians now have our own festivals. We have our own days of worship. We have our own institutions separate from the Jews. We're not Jews. We don't need to keep these festivals any longer. Is that true? Is that what the Apostle John is really telling us here in these scriptures? Now, first of all, in Leviticus 23, verse 2, here God is speaking about his feasts, and he says this. He says to Moses, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, concerning the feasts of the eternal." These are God's feasts. It doesn't say the feast of the Jews. It says the feast of the eternal, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations. Even these are my feasts. God says that these are his feasts. And these feasts he gave to Israel to celebrate. And not just Israel. We find in Exodus 12th chapter. God says that there's one law for the Israelite and for the stranger that sojourns among you. And that if the stranger wanted to keep the Passover, he says, let all his males be circumcised and they can come and keep the Passover. We find in the Old Testament Gentiles keeping the feast, Gentiles keeping the Sabbath, Gentiles keeping the sacrificial law. And I also have a booklet online that I'll put the link in the description below as well with the other booklets, called The Feasts in the Book of Genesis. And we find that these festivals were also in the book of Genesis as well. So these festivals are not just for Israel, they were for the Gentiles as well. It's actually these festivals are for all mankind. We find in Zechariah the 14th chapter that nations come up to Jerusalem to worship the King, which is Jesus Christ, and they are keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. These festivals are for all mankind, not just for Israel. So what does the Apostle John, what does he mean here when he says the feast of the Jews or the Jews' Passover? Is he saying to people that these are for the Jews and we don't need to keep it any longer? Absolutely not. I want to quote to you from this book by Samuele Bacciocchi on page 72 of his book, God's Feasts in Scripture and History. And it makes it plain here why he puts it in this way, the Apostle John. It says here, an indirect indication of the Christian observance of the Passover is John's frequent use of the phrase, Passover of the Jews was at hand. John's concern to inform the reader that he is referring to the Passover of the Jews suggests that, to use Jehoiakim Jeremiah's words, he obviously distinguishes the Jewish Passover from the Christian. That's all he's doing. He's making a distinction between the feast of the Jews' Passover as opposed to the Christian Passover. There was a Christian Passover. At that time, you couldn't tell the difference between a Christian and a Jew. You found Christians in the synagogues celebrating on the Sabbath. Look at the Apostle Paul. When he was Saul and he was persecuting the church of God, he was looking for Christians in the synagogues. they were worshiping in the synagogues. The Jerusalem conference in Acts, the 15th chapter. James wrote that if the Gentiles wanted to know more about God's way and God's law, they have Moses and the prophets that are read every single Sabbath day. You can find that in Acts, the 15th chapter, telling the Gentiles to go to the synagogues and learn about God's way in the synagogues on the Sabbath. You can tell the difference between a Christian and a Jew. And the Cambridge Bible Commentary says the same thing, what it says here. Now I want to read to you this on page 138 and 39 of the 2nd century. It says here, 2 earliest documents mentioning the observance of Passover are the Epistle of the Apostles, dated 150 AD, and Melito's Paschal Homily, dated 165 AD. These sources clearly indicate that in many ways Christians observed Passover as did the Jews. They observed it at the same time, on the night of Nisan 15th, and by the date rather than the day. They read the same Exodus story, used the same metaphors, and observed the same fast. It says, at first, some Christians celebrated Passover not only at the same time, but also in the same manner by eating the paschal lamb in a solemn feast. Most Christians, however, objected to eating the lamb. They believed that Christ was their paschal lamb, and consequently, no longer was there any need for them to sacrifice and eat the lamb. Apollinaris, Bishop of Hierapolis, AD 170, refutes those who ate the paschal lamb at the same time and manner as the Jews, saying the 14th of Nisan is the true Passover of the Lord, the great sacrifice. This is a Christian speaking here. Instead of the lamb, we have the Son of God. Here is a bishop saying that the 14th of Nisan is the true Passover of the Lord. They were keeping the Passover the same time as the Jews, the same festival as the Jews. However, there was a difference. The Christians worshiped the Messiah, Jesus Christ, as the Passover lamb, where the Jews did not. And this is why John is making that distinction, calling it the Feast of the Jews, because the Jews didn't believe in the Messiah, Jesus Christ, as the true Passover lamb. So he's making that distinction. And then it says this view prevailed and eventually led to the abandonment of the Jewish Paschal feast and to the adoption of fasting instead. Unfortunately, as Jehoiakim Jeremias observes, we do not know exactly when the festival was radically reconstructed and the Paschal visual replaced the Passover meal. So originally in the 2nd century, they were observing the Passover just the way the Jews are observing the Passover. You couldn't tell the difference between a Christian and a Jew. And this is why John makes this distinction, to show that there was a Jewish Passover and there was a Christian Passover. There was a Christian Feast of Tabernacles. There was a Christian Feast of Trumpets. Christian Day of Atonement. Christian Pentecost. They observed the exact same days as the Jews, but John made that distinction because Christians now worship Jesus Christ of Nazareth as the Messiah, as the true Paschal Lamb. And this is why we find why the Apostle John worded it in this way in his Gospels. Now, if you want to know more on the Passover, I urge you to download our booklet, Passover, Is It for Christians? Free of charge, off our website, BritishIsrael.ca, and we deal with a lot of these arguments in some of our web pages, and I'll put the links up to some of the web pages in the description, in the YouTube description below as well. And also download that booklet, The Feasts in Genesis, as well, and you will find that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they celebrated these feasts as well. This is Peter Salemi saying goodbye, friends. I'll see you here next time on the Watchman program.